Solution. Nick, the floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you. That was an excellent introduction. You got my last. I'll get started. Definitely want to make this interactive. I'll leave time for questions, and yeah, we just might as well kick off. So, so my name's Nick Piagentini. I am a specialist engineer in Prism Access, which means I'm an overlay. I cover a larger geo region, and I help our field teams design, test, architect Prism Access for our customers. So with that in mind, we can jump right into my small presentation I got for you. Some of this actually has already been touched on, so I'm going to skip along through this. I don't think anyone needs to be told that things are changing, that we are moving to a more highly disparate set of users, accessing a highly disparate set of resources, right? The idea of everyone sitting in an office, accessing servers that are in a data center has kind of vanished from our world, right? We have things in the cloud, we have people working remotely. In the last year or so, we have everybody working remotely. And remote networks, you look at branches, become a great target for attackers. And we want to try to simplify what we have to put into a branch at the same time of maintaining the same security. So some of the key things that we end up talking about is two of the kind of key use cases for secure access service edge. And one is around the mobile user and the other is around the remote network. And some key kind of takeaways around the mobile users is that kind of the traditional image of a VPN, which is around plumbing, which is around getting information from a user outside of your organization into a resource inside your organization, right? And honestly, if we think about that, it's all about traffic steering to private IP space. How do I get a user who's not in the office to be able to access resources that are not on the internet? That's only a small part of really what the secure access service edge needs to deal with. It's still something that needs to be solved, but it is no longer kind of the key reason to have a VPN. We also noticed that when users can make a decision when their VPN is on and when their VPN is off, they'll inevitably turn it off whenever it creates any issues for them. Those might be issues for perfectly valid business reasons, or it might be because it's blocking something that really should be blocked, but the user doesn't feel it should be blocked, so they turn it on. Moral of the story is, if you leave the security design of your environment up to your user's whims, you're going to have a bad security design. And then finally, when your users are working from home, they still need all the same security as they needed when they were sitting in the office. It's not just about connectivity. They can still be attacked. There's still phishing attacks, credential theft, all of that going on. So the fact that they are no longer in the office behind your enterprise class firewalls doesn't mean that they should have a completely different security stance. They need the same. When we look at things like your branch and retail, we start seeing an increase in the use of commodity internet, broadband internet, rather than expensive MPLS or dedicated lines. But then you need the ability to shape and control traffic going across that internet. And we need to be able to drive that traffic in the most effective route to where it's going. And that might be different based on the user, on the application they're using. So we need a lot of intelligence built into that. And we still need that exact kind of security that we would have at our central office. Whether it's a physical device there or a cloud service, we cannot leave the branch unprotected. Those users there need the same level of security that they get in the office. So approaching these both is kind of our product, our CASB, our Secure Access Service Edge. CASB is part of it. And honestly, all these new terms, I get a little bit of fatigue around them, I'll be honest, around Gartner terms. There's a lot of them, and most of them sound silly when you say them out loud as an adult. One of the only reasons I really like Secure Access Service Edge, honestly, is I can collapse all these terms you see on the screen into kind of one. So it saves me from my acronym fatigue. But realistically, the logic of the Secure Access Service Edge, or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as just a secure edge, is to say, look, you used to have a secure edge very easily. It was the router at the egress of your corporate headquarters, and the firewall there, and the firewall in front of your data center. And all of your users sat behind one, and all of your resources sat behind the other. It was a very small edge. There wasn't a lot of terrain for you to protect. But as we move to the modern world that we're in now, we realize that our edge becomes the internet. It becomes the entire globe potentially. So the goal of the Secure Access Service Edge is this idea of both your network as a service and security as a service collapsing in on each other, right? Being part of the same solution. Logically extending not just your security perimeter, right, but your internal routable IP space to whatever users you needed to go to, whether they're in a remote office, whether they're at home, maybe they'll be in an airport again sometime soon, who knows? Certainly sure my family would like me to get to the airport again soon. So wherever they are, they still need to be part of that network as if they were old school sitting within your cube farm. And more importantly, you need to be able to put security controls between them and everything they're going to, and really the entire internet. It's not enough to secure them going to your SaaS applications. You have to stop them from hitting malicious content or dangerous applications that have nothing to do directly with your work. And so this is what we see as the secure access service edge. So when you hear that term, it's really this kind of idea that we can no longer kind of separate the concept of security as a service and network as a service, that this needs to be a holistic fabric, a connection that you can use, that you can deploy into any of these scenarios. And you'll see every possible buzzword bingo thing over here. Maybe we left out data lake, so I'll just say it now. But all of these terms, all of these kinds of niche quadrants, if you will, are really use cases within the secure access service edge. And CASB is a great example. The Cloud Access Security Broker is truly just a secure edge use case. It's the particular example of a remote user accessing a SaaS application. But so much of what it does is also apropos of a remote user accessing one of your own edge applications running in a data center, or running in an Azure environment, or really going to their own websites, perhaps following on a link that they got in their personal email that promises them an Amazon gift card, or a camera drone, which is in fact just a targeted attack to harvest their credentials, right? We want to approach the entire problem rather than just one use case. It makes your life easier deploying this solution because you get to tick all of these boxes with one console, one interface, one set of tools. And I will leave time for questions at the end, unless we want to stop during it. I think maybe we'll just run through this and then pause for questions, but I am super flexible.
Good for now.
Excellent. So we have two components to make up our secure access service edge. Our security of a service layer is delivered through what we call Prisma Access. And what this really is the Palo Alto security stack as a service. So rather than you building firewalls in VM space or installing them in physical locations, this is a service offered to you. You don't deal with any specific settings on interfaces here. Everything is done through like an abstraction layer. The advantage is we can now take advantage of a much larger infrastructure for you to deploy into. And this ticks off things like the full network security stack, your inline CASB solutions, and your zero trust network access. And to be perfectly clear, the really cool thing here, and we'll turn back around to this later, is this idea of this full network security stack. Every other player in this space solves this particular problem, this security as a service for distributed workforces and applications with the use of a web proxy. Everybody has chosen to go that path because it's kind of easy. But the trouble is, not all traffic will be web-based. Certainly traffic to the internet will be, but not to your data centers, not to your Azure environments. And more importantly, kind of addressing security for that at the network layer lets you deal with all of the kind of obfuscation tools, the evasive tools around web browsing. It lets you see everything that's going on from an endpoint so you can implement complete security controls across it. And this goes hand in hand, right, with our Prisma SD-WAN solution. And this is your network as a service layer, right? It provides not just a cloud delivered branch, right, where you take a single device to put into that branch. It's configured with zero touch from a centralized console. All you need is hands there. They're smart enough to plug the right cable into the right port. And then that thing comes online, checks in with the mothership, and becomes part of your logical fabric for for data communication across all of your locations. And that brings that next-gen SD-WAN. And what's so critical about a next-gen SD-WAN is that we no longer look at very simplistic networking kind of parameters to determine which path is best. Everyone's heard of latency, jitter, packet loss. This looks at things at a much more application layer, just like the security layer does. It understands the application. It understands that packets might be going great, but if we're getting errors from a web server, there is a problem with that connection. And more importantly, it lets us architect how that traffic should flow across the various links you have, and where the security of the service layer gives you unprecedented visibility into what kind of applications and potential threats your users are seeing. The network of the service layer gives you performance benchmarks. It lets you understand where the problem is. If a user complains about not being able to get to a particular service, you will know if it's because of something at their site or something about that service itself, right? And that ability to know where to troubleshoot, to clearly define whether it's your problem or Slack's problem is really powerful. So them together give us all of these lovely kind of features. I do have slides drilling into a lot of these later on that we can go through, so if you want to get into that, but recognizing that we deploy this, right? And we deploy this to our customers in a way that allows them to have all of these through a single connection, right? There is a IPsec tunnel from the branch. There is a VPN client equivalent, right, from the mobile or user, even on a laptop. It doesn't have to be a mobile device. And they will, by definition, flow through all of these kinds of controls and visibility. And we'll dig into all of that. I see for a lot of you, this is the first time you're seeing Prisma Access, so no problem. We will definitely clear up what that is. So over here, you see a simplified architecture. But this simplified architecture really tells you 80% of what you need to know about how this works. And in the middle there, you see a little blue cloud that says Prisma Access. You see our Prisma SD-WAN devices sitting at data centers and remote networks. I could have put it on the public cloud data center too, but the icon got in the way of where I was going to write the words, but they exist in virtualized environments just as they do in physical environments. And what this is really showing us is that Prisma Access becomes a secure fabric, or if you're leveraging the SD-WAN fabric for connectivity, Prisma Access becomes a logical security layer on top of it. And all we need to have traffic go through the enforcement point of Prisma Access is some kind of encrypted tunnel into it. IPsec to remote locations, VPN for mobile users. We support certain web-based access too through proxies, both explicit and reverse. But once we drive traffic into Prisma Access, it can then be routed to anything else connected to Prisma Access or to the internet. And so what it allows us to do is basically create, if we need to, a fully meshed security fabric. A user just needs to connect to Access, and it has the equivalent of having a VPN connection to a particular office, maybe to an Azure environment, maybe to an AWS environment. They don't need to select which one they're connecting to, right? Once they connect to the secure fabric, they're interconnected to everything else. And if you've opted to use Prisma SD-WAN to actually build your fabric, Prisma Access sits logically on top of it. If traffic needs to go to the data center and doesn't need to go through Prisma Access, it would go directly from a Prisma SD-WAN ion to a second Prisma SD-WAN ion. If it needs to egress from that remote network to the internet, rather than going direct to internet, it goes through Prisma Access. So now you still have that full stack security solution at the remote network, but you didn't put a firewall there. You didn't have to manage another device. You get the thin branch, not the thick branch, right? It has a single always-on SD-WAN appliance there, and that ties it into the full security suite we have. And not to get off topic, but Prisma Access is only one component of what Palo Alto can provide for security. It has a number of things under our Cortex label that deal with anomaly detection, behavioral analytics, very deep examination into malware and its behaviors. And all of that would sit on top of Prisma Access. So this plumbing basically opens you up to turn on as a service so many additional features. You need enhanced DLP functionality. That's a switch you turn on in Prisma Access. You want to profile IoT devices in your remote network and build policy based on that. That's a feature you turn on in Prisma Access. You want to enable autonomous digital experience management, which is a great marketing term because it doesn't actually clarify what it is to anybody. But it's something that allows you to look at performance of your mobile users and their VPN clients. So when they open a support ticket with you that says the VPN is slow, you can look at this data and go like, maybe you need to free up some hard drive space, buddy, because that's why your thing isn't working. And all of that becomes a feature you turn on top of Prisma Access. So it not only solves the secure access service edge problem, but it now puts into place a true platform that lets you turn on additional services at will. And you can see one of those additional services in the upper right there, Prisma SaaS. Really, to solve a CASB use case, you have an inline enforcement point, which in this case is Prisma Access, and an API-based enforcement point, which for us is Prisma SaaS. And so if that's something that you need, it's just another feature you turn on. Prisma Access takes care of everything on the inline enforcement, and then Prisma SaaS gives you the API hooks in. It allows you to activate which features you need and which locations you need them. Now, what is that cloud in the middle? And why would you use it as an interconnect? Well, what that cloud in the middle is Palo Alto running virtualized equipment on GCP, on AWS, and leveraging their infrastructure. And I'm going to pause because this is a really great poll coming back. And we see 74% security solutions on-prem. And that is extremely common, right? That is the traditional way we do things. And Prisma Access is not saying you're going to have no security solutions on-prem. There's a lot of use cases for a firewall, for east-west segmentation in a data center. But what you might find is that for remote offices, small offices, if anyone works in retail, has shop fronts, if anyone provides a service to some kind of retail environment where they have to put some of their equipment into many, other locations, maybe to manage some devices there. All those scenarios are probably better solved through a cloud-based security tool sitting on top of SD-WAN than a SD-WAN box and a physical device in the same location. So that's a great quote. That's great information to think about. But here, in any case, you see the impressive amount of fiber that Google has laid across the globe, and understand that we get to leverage that. We have the premium access within GCP. We leverage their Anycast functionality, their redundant connectivity, their multiple availability zones, and you basically get to take advantage of that. So when you turn on Prisma Access and you activate its locations, you get to ride Google Fiber when you go from, say, Germany to the US for communication, rather than having to find commodity internet to connect your own IPsec tunnel between them. And what this fundamentally lets us do is expand. So we have points of presence between AWS and Google Compute at about 104 locations globally, which means whether you're turning on a point for mobile users to connect to, or you're establishing an IPsec VPN to either maybe an AWS region or to a physical office somewhere, you're able to put that connection, that secure edge, very close to that user or office. We probably see the advantages of this much larger with the mobile user component. You have only so many offices, but your users are able to travel. And while they may all be in one location now, there might be a time when many of them go somewhere else. And it might be difficult to instantly have an infrastructure there for them to connect into. And with this, you can just activate a mobile user node in, say, Liechtenstein. I use that as an example because it's a fun word. And it can connect there. And what that means is that they connect to that secure edge there. That is a Palo Alto firewall. We apply security on ingress. And then their traffic, if it's just going to the internet, goes directly from there. No backhaul. You're not bringing it back to your headquarters so that you can apply security to it, so that you can get visibility to it, which means they get excellent performance. And the only traffic that needs to travel across this fiber will be traffic coming back to a resource that is physically located somewhere else, like in a data center, like in a particular availability zone. So you can turn on a full tunnel of VPN with no split tunneling, because you're not actually absorbing all that user traffic. The internet traffic goes to the internet from that secure edge, does not need to touch any of your on-prem equipment or your on-prem networks. So you get the best of both worlds. You get the performance you normally see with aggressive split tunneling, but then you get the visibility you would see with a full tunnel always-on environment. And in fact, that's what we see people moving to, rather than what I call the AnyConnect model, where you double-click the icon when you have to do work, and then you exit it when you want to watch videos. Instead, The VPN, and it's a terrible term for it now because that's not really the only thing it does. The secure edge client, let's call it, why not? It stays on all the time. The user doesn't have to think about it. They don't have to think about who they need to connect to, what they need to connect to. It automatically connects to the closest available node that you've activated. And then their internet goes directly from there. Traffic that needs to come back to any of your private IP address space comes back to where it needs to go. So it becomes very powerful. What's the other side of it? What if you don't choose a secure access service edge, right? You're putting yourself in a scenario where you're buying different solutions for all of these different use cases we've been talking about, right? That you maybe have a remote access VPN for access to your data center. And then maybe if you have developers working in AWS, they've stood up their own open VPN to get access to their dev environment. So they turn off the corporate VPN and fire up their open VPN when they're doing that. And then they turn that off when they're doing something else. So you get a complexity, you get security gaps. Perhaps the product you bought for your CASB solution, which doesn't provide security to other websites or provide backhaul to your data center, perhaps that has different security features than what you had on-prem in your firewall. So now when the user is outside of your network, they have separate security policies and a different level of their security posture than when they're on-prem. And really, if you think about it, why would your user who's working from home on your corporate issued laptop, why would they have a different set of security requirements there than when they're in the office? And really, why would it be less? Why would you give them a lesser security stack just because they're remote? And it doesn't make sense, right? They should all be solved with the same tool, right? Because it's all really the same problem. So Prisma Access, consistency across all of these use cases. It's globally distributed where you don't have to pay for that, right? You just purchase your number of users coming through or your bandwidth, and you connect it where they need to be connected. Our security stack is not brand new. PanOS, right? The underlying engine of security in Prisma Access is on version 10.0 now. We have stellar results in the attack and MITRE space. We've developed the concept of next generation firewall. So you're not coming into some untried, untrusted set of tools. National governments, banks, militaries, hospitals, all use this solution, right? So you're getting something that you know is best in class, that is enterprise class, that has been validated. And with our SD-WAN functionality as part of Prisma now, you get the most sophisticated, most flexible SD-WAN functionality across your environment to pick the best paths, to aggregate the right kinds of connections. And there is a great deal of automation between these. As you deploy your always-on endpoints, your ION devices into your branches, and you tag an interface as Prisma Access, that act of that configuration for your SD-WAN builds the required IPsec tunnels into Prisma Access, meaning that you're not having to duplicate work in two interfaces, right? Because you manage it from one source of truth. So at a high level with business value, and honestly, if there's a bunch of questions or anyone wants to interrupt, feel free. I don't know how we want to do that there. I'll go through this, and then I have my more technical things. But when we talk about a business value, because it's great if it is secure, but it also has to be cost effective. And so a few things you're going to see here. One is around speed and agility, the idea of a consistent security compliance across everything. And while there's a cost to deploying Prisma Access, it is an upfront service cost, right, that pays for itself in many ways through a reduced operational cost and complexity. It's kind of why people use Salesforce now and don't roll their own CRM database, right, like they used to all the time. And it can provide an improved user experience, right? You're able to put a very powerful set of networking tools out there for your users without you having to invest in all of that. So let's talk a little bit about all these things and where they pull together, right? The idea of it as a service and the way we deploy it allows this kind of full traffic model support. And I think this is really critical because, again, none of our competitors actually do this. And we don't need to get into weeds about features between us and them. I like to avoid that. Everybody makes some good products out there. I'm not knocking any vendor out there. But across the board, there's been a kind of an assumption made or a decision where web traffic is what we need to protect, and it's really between clients going to web servers. And that is what our competitors do, and many of them do it very well. But that is not really the solution we're trying to have. That is just a use case. So you can imagine that you might have the system management servers, right? SCCM running in your office, and you want to push out updates to mobile users at their laptops who are working from home. You can't do that through a proxy. You can do that through Prisma Access. So this idea of both client to server, client to client, right? Server to server. Because it is a network stack, we can support any kind of traffic, right? And that could be complex, and rolling it on your own can be complex. But because we do it as a service, we really simplify what's going on in the back end. There could be hundreds of virtualized security nodes in Google Compute and AWS that are meshed together with IPsec tunnels running a separate instance of IBGP, right, to understand how it needs to flow. But you don't see any of that. To you, it's represented as a single Ethernet segment that spans the globe. And you could propagate routes into it, so they learn about what's at your locations, and you can learn routes from it to see where the mobile users are, and the rest of it is completely simplified away from you. So that's what makes it operationally effective. It makes it flexible. What's nice is you purchase this by users, you purchase it by bandwidth. If you close down one office and open another office, it's just a question of changing where your IPsec tunnel goes to, right? You could easily recoup that cost and use it somewhere else. It is infinitely flexible. And what I really like about it is you're no longer pricing out hardware and going through the hardware, sizing process, which it has to be one of the most difficult things for a modern IT manager to go through. You're basically being asked, guess what level of TLS 1.3 decrypt I'm going to do in this office in 3 years. Also, guess how many people are going to be there. And I don't know how anyone can do that. Right? There's almost no way to know what's going to evolve. I've been at Palo Alto for a very long time, and I have watched the percentage of traffic that is SSL increase fourfold from what it was when I started. And now we see TLS 1.3 everywhere, which takes more computational cycles to crack. So if you spec'd out a box doing your due diligence 3 years ago for one of your locations, maybe right now it doesn't matter because you have no one in your locations, but imagine you did have people in your location. It would probably be more SSL decrypt traffic than you ever expected that box to do, which puts you in a situation where you did not right size it. Those are air quotes around that term. And now you need to replace it with a different box. Well, Prisma Access is always right sized. You don't buy it by CPU. You buy it for mobile users by the number of users. You buy it by remote network by the amount of bandwidth. And we have a SLA around the latency of our security stack. 4 nines worth of traffic will egress that stack sub 10 milliseconds from when it came in. Now, if you want to throw 500 megabits per second of TLS 1.3's traffic to be decrypted, then it's on us to scale up the CPUs and virtualized equipment we have in the cloud to maintain that SLA. So as a result, you always have the right CPU. You always have the right level of box for your users, for whatever they're doing. And you don't need to plan that for the future. And if you get, 1,000 new users next year, you buy 1,000 more licenses. That's all you have to do. You don't have to increase the firewalls that you're using as your VPN concentrators. And that flexibility, and if this last year has not taught us anything, it has certainly taught us that we need to be able to be flexible because we don't always know if our IT environment is going to be the same as it was the year before. That flexibility is worth a significant amount right there.
Nick, one question coming in is, do you have to have Palo Alto networks currently in your environment in order to leverage the Prisma Access solution?
Oh, that is a fantastic question, right? And the answer is no, you do not. So if you could imagine, right, this diagrams we have here for like the mobile users, or even what I see over here with, say, the remote networks, right? And I'll come back to the slides. This I know the picture looks like a Palo Alto firewall, but one of the really awesome parts about this that I just really love is that the other end of this connection just has to be something that can do IPsec. So this could be a CloudGenix box, right? Our Prisma SD-WAN. In a small office, it could be your Meraki. That's your router and wireless access point, right? It can be anything. You don't need any Palo Alto footprint in place to immediately step in and put all of your traffic through the state-of-the-art, most current Palo Alto security stack, which means it works fantastic for new greenfield environments. You're not putting in more boxes, right? You can run it with whatever you have there. And realistically, what we tend to see, right? What we tend to see at these locations is one out of two answers. Right, let me back up one. One out of two things goes here. We either go with what I like to call the free and easy, where you take a device that's already in that location that can do IPsec and use that. That's maybe your Meraki, maybe your router that was given to you by your ISP. Or you put something here that adds additional value, like an SD-WAN appliance, right? This is doing the security. You don't need a firewall there. That's redundant. But SD-WAN could do some pretty cool things. And that makes it very easy to turn on for a particular set of your users, a particular set of your locations, and then expand it as needed. So that is a great, great question. And I think I'd want to just touch on one kind of other concept here around the mobile users to make sure that we're all kind of on the same page is we solve both the kind of CASB user going to cloud apps problem. We solve the remote access problem in zero trust networking with the user coming in to access internal resources. And we provide consistent security for the user going to sites that are unrelated to the business, but could still host malicious content that could impact your user and thus impact your work. So it supports all applications, RDP if you need to use it, Citrix if you're running that, any application on any port or protocol. And then we can make sure that we have a secure edge near them with our 104 locations globally. And then everything goes through that protection. So first of all, you get visibility to everything that's happening, and you can put controls in on whatever it is you need to. So that is really the high level kind of conversation around this. And I'm going to start talking about some of those individual features, right, that you saw out there. I'll go through it. But I'm going to pause again and see if there's something we might want to segue to.
We had a question on pricing on users and how that works. If they scale up and down their business, are they able to scale up and down user count as well?
So that's a great question. And because we are a publicly traded company, we don't scale down. We let you scale up. We don't give you users back. So that's usually a discussion we have to have when you're looking at what you're working with. If you think you're going to have less users going forward, obviously we probably have to visit that on a one-off basis. But the way we kind of operate is that we look at a unique user count. So it's not about concurrent users. It's around unique users. And that allows a user that could be on multiple devices only counts as a single one. So I might have it on my laptop and on my phone and on my tablet. I'm still just one user. And so we usually look to price it around the number of people in your organization, number of people in your company that use remote access. And most of the time that stays the same or goes up. There are certainly scenarios where that goes down, and probably want to look at your term when you renew. You would just renew with less users at that point. It's a good question, though. All right, so I'll start digging into each of these technical topics. Feel free to interrupt with questions as we go along. So one of the networks and service layer functions is the VPN, right? The idea of how do we interconnect. And for us, we have quite a few ways of doing it. We can leverage the SD-WAN as our fabric of connection. We can leverage a traditional IPsec VPN. We have the idea of a VPN client. So our VPN client is called Global Protect. It can connect via IPsec or SSL, depending on the nature of where it is and what's allowed out of its location. And that provides a full tunnel, right? Tunnels all network traffic. For ISPs, we sell a clean pipe solution. That's, maybe not as interesting here. And then we have two kinds of clientless VPN, two kinds of traffic steering mechanisms that take traffic into Prisma Access, but do not require a client on the endpoint. So one is a reverse proxy, a web page rewriter, and you use that to publish normally internal resources out to the web through an authenticated portal. And then the other is a traditional secure web gateway, which uses a pack file to drive specific traffic that would be normally internet bound through the Prisma Access service. And you can use those in the scenarios where a full client wouldn't make sense, or maybe is something that you cannot, is prohibitive for you to deploy. We also are tightly integrated with the concept of zero trust. I will say one thing about zero trust. It is like a logical concept. It is not a product. You will see a lot of people will sell you a zero trust whatever, and that's really poorly named, right? Zero trust is not a product. It is not even a specific checklist of settings to configure. It is a logical approach to security. And we play very heavily into that. We actually have before there was a Zero Trust. And then the guy who wrote up Zero Trust came to work for us. And, we've always been highly kind of visible within this space. But ultimately, it is really around identifying at the time of connection, who is the person connecting, what are they connecting to, what is the nature of their connection, like where are they coming from, what is the type of device they're coming from, is it a corporate device, is it a BYOD device, is it coming from a strange location, and really making that contextual control decision on policy for whether they can access that resource. And that is really what Zero Trust is about. One thing that we like to add to that is, and we'll see a lot of solutions out there. Google has some Zero Trust kind of authentication solutions. You'll see our friends at Okta do a lot of stuff around Zero Trust and where the authentication and authorization portion of it can play in there. One thing we feel very strongly about is once you've allowed that connection, you can't take your hands off the wheel at that point. You still need to monitor that connection. We still need deep packet inspection. What is the nature, the content of that connection? You've gone through all this work to ensure it's the right person from the right device, the right time, going to the right place. You need to make sure they're doing the right things once they've connected. And that's not really part of Zero Trust specifically, but it's certainly part of our solution. And that's kind of how it fits in there. But everything we do with our mobile users and with our remote networks allows us to do a user identity, which is basically build policies around Active Directory LDAP groups, right? Instead of IP addresses. And all of it looks at the nature of the application. It's not ports and protocol. It is teasing out the very specific application that's being used, sometimes the application function. And then we have this idea of a host information profile, which is an endpoint assessment. Is it a corporate device? Does it have AV running? Is there a firewall turned on? All those sort of things. All the OPSWAT checks, right? And then we can use all of that together to decide whether something is allowed by policy. And then we provide continuous security, inline enforcement, deep packet inspection of that traffic once it's allowed. We provide some quality of service controls. This is much richer in our SD-WAN layer than it is in our security as a service, but it exists in both. And this would allow people to basically ensure business critical apps that are maybe prone to latency, get the less latent connections, ones that aren't are optimized for how they flow. And as I said, we support this in really both layers, both the security as a service in a much more limited way, and then the network as a service is where this is extremely powerful, right? That can make very intelligent routing decisions based, again, on users, on the applications they're using, and not on port and protocol. Oop, let me back off one. We have a rich DNS security product. Some of you might work with things like Umbrella or like an Infoblox. And our DNS security is different than theirs. Ours is an inline deep packet inspection DNS security. So we are not a DNS resolver. You don't need to configure your DNS server to point to Prisma Access. You can keep using whatever DNS server you want. We can actually interoperate with both of those products as well, depending on which features you wanted to turn on those products. But what becomes interesting is now we examine the traffic, right? We approach it as kind of a lot of the tools you might have seen if you've worked with traditional intrusion prevention systems in the past, right? And what this allows us to do is not just block known bad domains, but we have an entire threat intelligence cloud behind us. It leverages sandboxing technology. It leverages threat feeds that are both internal to us, like our Unit 42, and specific within our industry, like the Cyber Threat Alliance. And as we learn about malicious objects in our sandbox, we don't just create the traditional signatures to look for a known bad, like executable. We also extract from their behavior known command and control URLs, known malware URLs. We are able to pick up on their domain generation algorithms. And then we can search for all of that within a traffic traversing Prisma Access. So you get this full stack of DNS security, the same you would get with an Umbrella or with an Infoblox, but you get it as inline enforcement across both your mobile users and your on-prem thing as part of the Prisma Access solution. There's, of course, firewall as a service. We manage this either through a appliance called Panorama, or if you are a new to Palo Alto customer and you have no other Palo Alto devices you need to manage in the same interface, we have an extremely clean cloud-based interface to manage our firewall as a service. And here you create policies in one place. You create a mobile user policy set, and it doesn't matter whether you have 2 or 100 mobile user locations. It takes the same amount of effort to configure policy for them, right? You build it in one place and they all get that setting. Additionally, within our engine, the same thing as doing that DNS inspection can also provide all of the kind of traditional IPS inspection that you would imagine. So we're going to look for malware, command and control traffic. We do SSL decrypt with a man-in-the-middle type attack, right? So we can look at the content within secure communications. And we can be very granular about what we decrypt. We can target only particular groups of your users for decryption. We can target only particular types of sites for decryption. And all of this is done within that security SLA, within that sub 10 millisecond time across the platform. So turning on these features doesn't degrade performance. Turning on these features allows you to continue to run with that right size, but having all of this threat prevention there. And you do not need to get very detailed into this. You can just turn it on with the default settings, the on standard profiles, and be done with it. It doesn't require specialized knowledge. Scale is not. If any of you used to manage the old like introvert or snort-based IPS sensors, this is a whole different world. You are not having to optimize your policies at all. So it's a whole lot cleaner around that. And then we also have an enhanced DLP functionality. And I think we're coming towards the end here, so I'll touch on this quickly. We can look for hundreds of predefined patterns that we collect together. This will actually be supported both in our Panorama and our Cloud Manager in the near future. Right now it's just Panorama. And then you can make decisions around this, whether you want to allow certain content to leave your environment or you want to just be alerted when it does, right? And tie all that in within this same platform. So it's not a new client, it's not a new tool, it's just a license that you enable within Prisma Access. Which again is one of our core things that we give you, is that ability to turn on enhanced security features kind of when you need them without having to retool or deploy new clients or new sensors into your environment. And all these tools together actually provide a lot of what we were talking about earlier on around the Cloud Access Security Broker, which is a very popular term we see these days. We compete with a lot of vendors that see themselves in that space as opposed to a secure access service edge. But really what a Cloud Access Security Broker is exactly what we've been talking about. It is a way of driving traffic through an enforcement point that does not need to be hosted within your environment, that's optimized for users that are remote, that are going to cloud services that are remote. And once it comes through that enforcement point, you can make decisions based on the applications they're going to and the type of content they're putting there. And that is security that we provide as part of Prisma Access. We do have an API tool that will let you look at configuration, right, of your cloud services that we call Prisma SaaS. And that can be added in and shares log and configuration information with Prisma Access. So it all becomes part of the same ecosystem. All right, I think that was all the key points I had. So let me pause there. We have a few minutes left. I don't know what kind of housekeeping we need to do, if there's any other questions that I can answer.
Got one coming in. How does communications inspection work with PHI or HIPAA protected info?
It's a great question. So there's a couple ways that I could interpret it as well. So we can certainly look for that kind of content as part of our DLP functionality. So you can crack open SSL traffic going to personal storage type sites, or really any odd categories like recently registered or dynamic DNS, and say, do not allow any of these any of this data to leave the network. You also might be asking that based on, well, how do we keep your HIPAA data secure from, Prisma Access, as it were, right? We want to make sure we're not seeing that information, perhaps, if, how do we secure that? And one of the nice things about the DLP service that we have, both for the API and the inline enforcement, is it doesn't store the data unmasked. So it would mask any data it detected within its snippets, and it would store it that way, so it doesn't become a possible violation for that. And additionally, if you're afraid about encountering PII that you don't want to secure, like you don't want to see one of your users making their doctor's appointments, the way that we do SSL decrypt is we can exempt certain URL categories. So by exempting things like personal finance, banking, health, stock advice, those sort of things. We do not decrypt that traffic in the first place. So you do not have to worry about having seen your users' private information and thus being forced to secure it. It's a good question.
Perfect, perfect. I'm not seeing any other questions that haven't been answered in the chat. So that, I think I'll just steal back your slide unless you have some finishing thoughts.
You know, I will just end with, you know, we have our various Palo Alto teams out there ready to work with Matrix. And feel free to, we can do proof of concepts, evals. We have a lot of flexibility in how we can walk folks through this. So feel free to take us up on that.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Nick. That was a fantastic display. You clearly know your stuff. I'm going to get a little bigger here, be where I should be, which is right in this beer. This was a fantastic journey through Palo Alto's Prisma Access solution. Really looking forward to continuing the conversations with everybody that was on this call. See how hard it is to not look at yourself. I'm just like, hey. But really looking forward to continuing the conversations with everybody. We were hoping to get into a little bit of a live demonstration, which we weren't able to get to today. So if you'd like to set up something specifically for your organization, please work with your Matrix Networks account executive, and we will be sure to set one up ASAP. My last poll question here is about our next session, and that is featuring Cato Networks. Palo Alto's Prisma Access, as well as Cato Networks, are the only two SASE solutions on the market that we are highlighting in this SASE, Cheers to SASE webinar series. So we're very excited to showcase Cato Networks in our next session. This is all part of the reason I keep saying cheers and why I'm in the middle of a beer, right, is because for those of you that are attending 2 or more of our sessions, you'll be invited to our virtual craft beer tasting event, which is coming up in the middle of June. So if you came to our first one, you came to this one, just go to the next one to make the Cato folks feel good. But if this is your first webinar, then you still can qualify by coming to the next one. So we look forward to seeing you there. With that, I thank you all for attending today. Thank you so much. Thanks to my team, all these guys around me. Couldn't do it without you guys. And I look forward to seeing you on the 1st of June. Cheers.